MiniDisc. Say that word to an American music fan, and you'll likely get a blank stare. Say it to a Japanese audiophile, and you might spark a passionate, decade-long debate. It means very different things depending on where you were in the world. To the casual observer, the MiniDisc was simply Sony's great global flop, a digital format that arrived, flickered briefly, and then totally vanished. But the true story of the MiniDisc is far more compelling and, frankly, far more tragic than just another failed product. This story isn't just about a gadget that didn't sell globally. This is the definitive case study in catastrophic timing, massive consumer confusion, and pure corporate hubris. It took genuinely brilliant technology and turned it into one of the biggest technology scandals of the 1,990 seconds. This is the true story of how Sony, the very company that effectively invented portable music with the iconic Walkman, managed to fumble the future right out of their hands. It's a spectacular failure of imagination and execution. Welcome back to Tech Fails. Today, we're digging up the digital remains of the format that tried its absolute best to kill both the cassette and the CD. Instead, it was brutally and efficiently murdered by the rise of the MP3 file. To fully understand the MiniDisc's strange journey, we have to go back in time to 1992. The CD, which was another Sony-Philips collaboration, was the undisputed king of quality audio. But even the king had two massive drawbacks. First, the CD was inherently fragile and prone to skipping, especially in portable players. Second, and most importantly for the industry, you couldn't easily record on it at home. Cassette tapes were still dominating the portable and home recording market. The industry giants absolutely hated cassette tapes. Why? Because tapes were far too easy to copy, which they believed led to rampant piracy, and the analog quality degraded terribly over time. They urgently needed a successor to the cassette, specifically a digital successor. Thus began a silent technology scandal of sorts, a ruthless format war that erupted in 1992 between two absolute titans of audio, Sony and Philips. Both companies had different ideas about the future of music recording. Philips, still fresh off their massive success with the CD, unveiled the digital compact cassette, or DCC. This new format was deliberately designed to look and feel exactly like a standard analog cassette tape, which they thought would be reassuring to consumers. The key feature of the DCC was its crucial backward compatibility. You could actually play all of your old analog tapes in a shiny new DCC deck. The idea was incredibly genius to make the transition to digital recording feel seamless and easy for the average consumer. But Sony had a completely different, much bolder vision for the future. They looked at the CD and asked one simple question: how do we make that particular format recordable and genuinely portable? Their confident answer to the world was the MiniDisc. The MiniDisc itself was a small 2.5-inch magnet optical disc, permanently protected inside a durable plastic cartridge. You could hold it, you could drop it, and you could put it in your pocket, and the cartridge would keep the data safe and pristine. It was undeniably sleek, modern, and very high-tech. Crucially, the MiniDisc offered two key advantages over any tape. It offered instant track access, no more annoying waiting for a tape to rewind, and it was built with revolutionary technology called non-skip buffer memory. This innovation was years ahead of its time and was absolutely vital for portable use. The player would read the data ahead of the music being played, store it safely in a temporary memory chip, and then play it back from the chip. This buffer memory made the MiniDisc practically immune to skipping, a huge selling point. This was a critical feature that the original portable CD players desperately needed, but simply did not have the technology for yet. On paper and in hand, Sony had delivered a genuine masterpiece of engineering and portable design. So, given all this technical brilliance, why did this promising format ultimately sink with hardly a ripple? The MiniDisc's single most fatal flaw wasn't the physical disc itself, which was great. It was the specific audio codec it used for compression. This proprietary technology was called ATTRAC, standing for Adaptive Transform Acoustic Coding. Remember, the format launched back in 1992. Digital storage space was prohibitively expensive at the time. A standard CD held about 650 megabytes of data, but the MiniDisc was much smaller. If Sony wanted a small, recordable disc to hold a full 74 minutes of music, they absolutely had to compress the data heavily. Uncompressed audio would have required a much larger disc, defeating the purpose of portability. A-Track was Sony's own proprietary solution to this problem. It was engineered as a lossy compression algorithm, which means it selectively discarded audio information the human ear was least likely to actually detect or notice. This process effectively shrank the required file size down to about 1/5 of the original CD quality. This was a necessary compromise to achieve the physical size and recording time goals. Now, to their credit, the A-Track codec was genuinely good at its job. In its later, more refined iterations, like A-Track Type R and Type S, many expert listeners truly couldn't tell any audible difference between a CD and an MD recording. But unfortunately, the damage was done very early in the product cycle. The critical moment came when you told a consumer, especially an American consumer, that your product offered near CD quality. Marketing the format as CD-like quality instead of simply CD quality immediately created suspicion and doubt in the minds of consumers. You've already lost the battle for their money and trust. It was seen as an immediate, perceived compromise that critically undercut the entire value proposition of the format. This was especially damaging when the initial MiniDisc players were selling for upwards of $750 each. Consumers rightly asked, why should I pay significantly more money for a format that is technically and audibly worse than the uncompressed CD I already own and love? The price simply did not justify the perceived quality drop. This proprietary technology became a significant technology scandal for Sony later on down the line. When the internet and the standardized MP3 files came along, A-Track was exposed as a closed, complicated, and restrictive format. Transferring any music files meant forcing users to use terrible, complex Sony software like Sonic Stage. This software was an absolute nightmare of clunky interfaces and overly complicated file management that drove sophisticated users mad. It was the exact antithesis of the simple, open, drag-and-drop file structure that consumers were already starting to demand from digital media. Sony was forcing an old paradigm onto a new technology. This is where the format war got truly messy and complicated. Interestingly, Philips' DCC was an even greater failure, worse in the market than the MiniDisc. It was too reliant on the obsolete physical cassette shape. The DCC's mechanical parts were overly complex, and its core backward compatibility feature didn't overcome its own mediocre audio quality and lack of essential modern features. Sony ultimately won the niche format war of 1992, but while Sony was busy celebrating this minor, temporary victory, a much larger, more devastating market threat was silently brewing. This threat was the rapid, affordable rise of the recordable CD, the CDR. By the middle of the 1990 seconds, personal computer technology had exploded onto the scene. The cost of CD writers plummeted rapidly, and blank CDR discs became incredibly cheap and universally available. Now, for the very first time, consumers could easily and cheaply record their own music digitally onto a format that was demonstrably 100% CD quality. This was a huge advantage the MiniDisc could not match. Furthermore, the CDR was 100% compatible with consumers' existing car, home stereo, and portable CD players. The home computer had suddenly delivered a powerful, universal format. The MiniDisc core advantage, easy, high-quality digital recording, was completely neutralized and then overtaken by an unexpected external PC component. Sony failed to see the PC as a primary recording device. But the biggest strategic blunder, the real corporate disaster, was Sony's poorly executed approach to the vast global market, particularly the crucial United States market. Sony misread consumer habits entirely. In sharp contrast to the global market, the MiniDisc was an absolute massive hit in Japan. It fit perfectly into the specific Japanese lifestyle for several key reasons that were unique to that region. Firstly, physical CDs were significantly more expensive in Japan than elsewhere. This made music rental shops and copying onto a recordable format like MiniDisc an attractive economic necessity for many people. Secondly, the small, rugged, and non-skipping MiniDisc players were absolutely ideal for Japan's densely populated commuter culture. They worked perfectly on packed, moving commuter trains and buses. Finally, the Japanese consumer base was, and remains, generally more enthusiastic about adopting expensive, complex, high-tech gadgets early on in their life cycle. It was the perfect ecosystem for the MD. The US market, however, was fundamentally and radically different. CDs were cheap And the primary target consumer, the cash-strapped teenager, was simply not going to spend $500 on a recording deck for a niche format. Furthermore, Sony failed miserably to convince US record labels outside of its own Sony Music to aggressively release pre-recorded albums on the MiniDisc format. This was a fatal blow. In the US, the MiniDisc was instantly relegated to a deep niche, a tool primarily for musicians, recording journalists, and small college radio DJs. It was purely a recording medium, never a mass-market consumption medium. And a music format that does not have readily available commercial music to buy is, by definition, a sunset product from the moment of its launch. It simply could not cross the chasm to the mass market. As the 90 seconds turned into the 2000s, the entire game changed again and finally. This culminated in the ultimate technology scandal for all physical media formats. The digital age had arrived. Enter the MP3. When people discuss the failure of the MiniDisc, they often forget the critical chronology. It didn't fail only because the iconic iPod was invented in 2001. The MiniDisc was already desperately hemorrhaging market share and consumer confidence to the ubiquitous CDR and simple portable CD players before the year 2000 even arrived. But the simple, standardized MP3 file finished the job quickly and brutally. The MP3 was inherently simple because it was just a portable file, not a fragile physical disk. It lived on a hard drive instead of a plastic shell. It was easily shared over the burgeoning internet, and for the savvy user, it could be acquired for free if you knew where to look online. The sudden, unstoppable rise of Napster in the late 90 seconds was the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs of physical music media. Around the year 2000, Sony desperately tried to fight back against this tidal wave with NetMD, a version of the MiniDisc that finally allowed for high-speed file transfer from a consumer computer. This was their belated answer to the small Rio MP3 player and the coming digital age. The implementation of NetMD was an unmitigated disaster and was poorly received. It absolutely required the hated Sonic Stage software. Furthermore, it tied the transferred audio files to the specific hardware player, a heavy-handed form of digital rights management, or DRM. This system forced the users to strictly use their proprietary format and restrictive management software, turning the entire process into a chore. Consumers hated the complexity. Contrast that disastrous approach with the Apple iPod launched in 2001. The iPod was beautiful, it was simple, it worked with standardized MP3s, and it was backed by the intuitive, user-friendly iTunes software. Apple immediately understood that the future wasn't about the hardware holding the music. It was entirely about the easy-to-use software that managed the universal files. They focused on the user experience. Sony tried to drag the entire physical media era, kicking and screaming, into the brand new digital age. Apple, by contrast, simply abandoned the disc format entirely and embraced the file. MiniDisc was not ultimately killed by a better physical product competitor. It was killed by the radical concept of the digital file in flash memory. This technology scandal was that Sony, the company that had defined music media for 2 decades, was too heavily invested in the physical disc to recognize the shift. The MiniDisc was simply the last best disc-based system ever designed and made, but it was tragically released right before the entire world moved on from physical discs forever. It lingered on, largely surviving in Japan, until Sony finally stopped shipping the players globally in 2011. So, what were the final lessons learned from this spectacular failure of market timing? The primary lesson is that proprietary is poison. The reliance on closed 8-track and clunky Sonic Stage was arguably the biggest self-inflicted wound the company suffered. The format was also too expensive for too long and failed to make the format compelling for the crucial mass market. A music format that is only good for recording is strictly a niche product. A format that is good for consumption is a global success. Ultimately, timing is everything. Sony spent its valuable time and resources fighting a losing battle against Philips, a fight for the past while. The real devastating threat of the MP3 file and the PC revolution was busy eating their entire future market. The MiniDisc is not remembered as a bad format. It's remembered as a brilliant format that was tragically mismanaged, badly timed, and caught directly in the crossfire of one of the biggest market pivots in human history. It remains a fascinating technology scandal, a lasting warning label on the dangers of corporate tunnel vision and hubris. If you were one of the few, the proud, the MiniDisc owners, let me know in the comments below. What did you use it for most often? And do you still have any of those amazing, tiny, cartridge-protected discs lying around? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the spectacular failures and technology scandals that shape the modern world as we know it. We'll see you next time.